Food bank crisis in Europe. As our rulers double down on their war against Russia, workers across the EU are suffering rising hunger and fuel poverty. To anyone who's been following the conflict in Ukraine, from the 2014 coup through to the callous and wanton butchery of Donbas citizens of all ages, to Russia's special military operation aimed at saving the remaining lives of the Donbas peoples, it has been clear that every move to Volodymyr Zelensky and the other fascist leaders that preceded him was decided and dictated by US imperialism and was carried out in their interests. As so often before, we are drawn once again to Chairman Mao Zedong's famous description of the stupidity and eventual failure of imperialist aggression. Quote, "Imperialism lifts a rock only to drop it on its own feet," end quote. This succinct truism perfectly describes the financially suicidal use of anti-Russia sanctions by European countries. Countries across the continent are shunning cheap and plentiful gas and oil supplies when they need them most, smashing their own economies with measures that are having little effect on Russia. At the same time, they are pouring money and weapons into NATO's war on Russia through their Ukrainian proxy in the misguided hope that somehow, if they can prolong the misery for long enough, Russia will be wrecked. Or anyone will overthrow President Vladimir Putin so that the USA can get back to its heyday of grabbing the wealth of the former USSR. But this is not going to happen. Russia, like China, has more reasons than most to be against war, but its people also remember what happens when you don't stand up to fascism and imperialist brigandage. When the Russian oligarchs in the imperialist-dominated countries were sequestrated and turned into paupers overnight, the imperialists thought they were getting easy wealth. But these oligarchs weren't the natural supporters of President Putin and Russia. Just the opposite, and the stupid imperialists took away any power that these could have been traitors to Russia had. Meanwhile, President Putin has his highest ever ratings in Russia, and the country has become firmly locked into what it clearly sees as a sacred duty. When all the Western companies withdrew from Russia, hoping to see it collapse without their hands on its financial throat, they merely made way for loyal Russian enterprises to take over and fill in the gaps created. Imperialism has assisted Russia in becoming stronger in its resolve to resist and its resolve to strengthen trade and other links with non-imperialist countries around the world. Meanwhile, in the USA, the oil barons are hoping to replace the Russian fuel that is missing from Europe by shipping tanker load after tanker load of liquid natural gas, LNG, across the Atlantic Ocean, or straight from Syria, where they are still purloining the country's oil in massive quantities. US weapon companies are expecting fabulous profits from all of Europe now that so many countries have donated large proportions of their own arsenals to the NATO Ukro-Nazi war effort, all of which will help to leave European national coffers, Britain's included, destitute as a result of the much higher prices demanded by US companies, while it is also unlikely that the USA can supply enough fuel or weapons to satisfy demand. So Europe suffers to protect US hegemony, but the closer Europe comes to disaster, the more it will drag its US master under the waves with it. The analogy of the lifter of that infamous rock is becoming daily more obvious to more people. Remember when the Western press used to gleefully inundate us with stories of Soviet bread queues? Not starvation, mind you, but just queues. Now the working people of Europe are awash with food banks. In Britain there are very few towns that don't have at least one food bank, and they exist in multiples in every city. In Germany, surging food and fuel prices means millions more people are struggling to make ends meet, forcing many of the country's food banks to shut their doors to thousands of new applicants. Over a third of Germany's 962 food banks have stopped taking new applicants beyond the 2 million they were already helping, meaning some people having little or no answer to starving. Many German food banks have been forced to take this drastic step for the first time after demand rose more than 50% this year for access to the fruit, vegetables, bread, and other essentials they collect from shops and donors. One food bank chair in Friedberg, whose charity provides a basket of supplies every 2 weeks to 700 families, explained, quote, "We have a total of 120 baskets to give. There is only so much our volunteers can do." End quote. Meanwhile, over a quarter of the German population has now entered fuel poverty, defined as spending more than 10% of income on energy, up from 14.5% last year. More than a fifth of the European Union's people were already unable to heat their homes sufficiently last year, before the latest price surge, according to the latest data from EU statistics agency Eurostat. Charities from Spain to Latvia have reported 20 to 30% higher demand than last year and expect a further increase this winter. Meanwhile, in Bulgaria, one of the poorest countries in the EU, there was a 3/4 jump between September and October in people using the National Food Bank. Right across Europe, milk prices have soared 43% in the past year, while pork costs 55% more, and japonica rice has risen by 68%. In Central and Eastern Europe, the cost of staples has increased even more sharply. In Hungary, bread prices have risen by 80% over the past year. In the Netherlands, food banks have responded to this surge in inflation by increasing the limit of disposable income people can have to qualify as members to €300 per month, but are still expecting a 20% rise in demand this winter. Europe is one of the richest regions in the world, yet over 96 million people in the EU, roughly 22% of the bloc's total population, are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. For some households, even affording nutritious food can be a challenge, which can have serious health and social consequences. This is the reality of EU imperialism, which in turn is tied to and subservient to US imperialism. Only by standing up against their own leaders, against US imperialism, and against the media lies that paint Ukraine and the puppet Zelensky as the injured party and Russia as an imperialist bully, can workers in Europe hope to find a way out of this devastating downward spiral.
Thanks for listening to Proletarian Radio. We aim to bring you the best Marxist analysis on current affairs, revolutionary history, and theory. Do like, comment, subscribe, and share our content to help us reach the widest possible audience. We are a small organization with limited resources, and we need workers' support if we are to grow and fulfill our mission. If you are able to make a one-off or regular donation, no matter how small, please visit our website at thecommunists.org and register as a supporter.